All right, it's going to be fun. Mate, it's been a little bit in the making. Thanks for coming down to this not bad looking kind of venue.
It's a nice day. Can't complain.
It is. It's, would you believe it? It's still winter, but it's, like 18 degrees today. So, I mean, we didn't have to do too many layers. I just got back from Melbourne.
Very nice.
And it is piercing cold down there. So, just gets through and got stuck in the IT outage, which meant instead of flying back on Friday, flew back on Saturday night. What about you? What have you been up to?
Just been in the wilderness for the last few days. It's kind of you have this funny sort of meme-ish jokes on the internet of like hardcore AI guys are like doomsday prepper types, right? Like this idea that we're so engrossed in technology that we need to somehow like totally remove ourselves and put ourselves in the wilderness. So.
Before we begin, we're here as part of the Getting to Know the Projects and Community series, and you're a well-known voice in the AI space, at least to me anyway, and hopefully to the audience too, and the new audience that'll come to know you. But Vincent, can you tell us a bit more about yourself? What's your background? How did you get into AI?
Yeah, I'll get started with a bit of context for those that don't know me. So, born and raised in London in the UK and studied software engineering. And funny enough, for a brief moment in my career, I moved away from software engineering. I loved it. I loved IT. I loved machines. I told this story of when I was a child, when I used to travel overseas. I'd come back, but I could phone family that were overseas, and I'd be like, well, how is this possible that this phone can work over such large distances in like a split second? This is like 8-year-old Vincent trying to figure this out. So I'd get a screwdriver and unscrew phones. And
Wow.
that was like my start to like computers and software engineering and trying to make sense of that. Did an arts degree, wanted to do something that was not technology and just enjoy myself and find something that's a bit more creative. And I somehow stumbled in sort of that intersection of the two. So I ended up doing data related like software engineering work in a creative industries and marketing sort of context. So it was very much like behavioral science and what are people thinking? How do we measure marketing effectiveness? And that career sort of spanned like 8-9 years in the UK, and eventually came here, started working for marketing creative agencies, and then from that sort of shifted more into data science, product analytics, data science, then into AI, machine learning, and sort of that transitionary through my career. Yeah,
Fantastic. I had wondered, like, I saw that you'd, if you follow Vincent on LinkedIn, I mean, apart from some great write-ups that you've done in various publications and pushed out online, I think one of the first things I saw, and we'll talk about it in a bit.
Sure.
We're giving away a lot of things here, but the Build Club, and then it led to following you and seeing the things on LinkedIn that you'd post. I really liked one of the Outlook type reports that you pieced together, looking at all the different things and just giving a bit of a synopsis from your point of view. But recently you'd done keynote speaking at a marketing event, and I was like, oh, okay, that's really interesting, like AI and marketing. I didn't realize that you actually had a background in that, so that's really cool.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely the space we're in with AI. It's growing. It's definitely expanding, and I'd say I jumped into writing in the last year or two. I've always been sharing my thoughts, my ideas, and someone's like, oh, create a Substack. Oh, put that in an email newsletter. So finally I've gotten around to it and started sharing my thoughts. But they're my own ideas, they're my own thoughts, and my own projections on what I'm seeing.
Fantastic.
And yeah, some people think it makes for an interesting read.
Oh, well, good to hear. Where were you doing it before you started, writing and publishing things out? Was that just like internally inside the company, that kind of thing?
No, it's actually on paper. So I've got stacks of paper notes that I've taken over years and years and years of like ideas, thoughts, scribbles, diagrams, pieced together bits of information and notes and things I've heard in conferences, and just trying to piece that together. And then more recently, I've been using a lot of PK knowledge management tools like Obsidian and things like
fantastic.
that.
Okay.
And they sort of like bring that same note-taking experience into a digital realm. And to one of the questions that we'll probably get to a little later is, how do you take all this knowledge that you've curated and how do you turn it into something? So a lot of my process involves sort of taking these scatters of ideas, almost like you would on a whiteboard or up on a wall with little post-it notes, and how do I draw connections between these ideas? How do I create new ideas or novel concepts that maybe others haven't maybe considered before?
I really like that note-taking approach, and it's interesting because a lot of people maybe have started note-taking from a digital kind of format, but you've got the actual physical. You know, there were these things kids called books back in the day. We used to have to write and stuff. But are you thinking about maybe digitizing some of that stuff, like scanning those pages? Do you think that is that something that you already are doing, or maybe will?
I did a little bit. I haven't really considered it, but one of the things that happens is a lot of information, given the speed in which technology is moving, given the speed in which new information is created. I think something like 80 or 90% of the internet and the information that as of now has only been created in the last few years.
Wow.
So a lot of information decays really quickly.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
There's a lot of value in the historical context. There's a lot of value in some of those strong ideas and concepts that you pull together. But majority of those strong habits and things that you formed probably won't leave you. Like, you won't forget them. There'll be still scribbles somewhere that you can always go back to.
Oh, that's interesting. I think I don't know what movie it was, but there's one of these ones that I can't remember if it was a Robin Williams movie or one of those ones with that kid from The Sixth Sense and he's a little boy, AI type thing. But it's so many years in the future, and the only thing that's like left in terms of, there's not even humans left. It's like just this robotic hologram in a library that has knowledge. And it's talking about, you know, what was left after the humans all, you know, perished and whatever. It's like thousands and thousands of years in the future. But I think that going back to it, knowledge is this key thing. And do you see this thing where there was, what are the top use cases of AI tools? And it's like, okay, for marketing, creative content, for doing this. Apparently there's something called rubber ducking, which is an IT term where I'd never heard of this before, but when apparently IT folks are stuck, coders specifically, they'll talk to an inanimate kind of object or talk their thoughts out loud, and apparently that's termed rubber ducking. Never heard of it before. Maybe it's an American thing. I work with a lot of software developers, done a little bit of code myself. Never something that's come up. But number one is idea generation. You know, it's that knowledge, and that's what people are using AI for. What do you think about that?
In terms of creation of new concepts?
Or just that ID generation is the top use case and stuff that people are using GPT kind of tools for.
So the interesting concept here is bit of preface to where I'm going to get to this. So I'm in the process of actually writing a book. So one of the articles...
Oh, fantastic.
One of the articles I wrote on Medium just totally exploded, and it's called Design Patterns for Generative AI. So it's this concept in engineering. It's been around for quite some time, called design patterns. As you would imagine, like a blueprint, what are the patterns that you would follow to build a house, to build a piece of software, to build a couch? And the same thing with generative AI. What are those building blocks? What are those Lego pieces that we need to put together to essentially build a generative AI system or an advanced AI system? So I'm working through this book at the moment. And at the beginning, I need to frame readers to this concept of what is generative AI in the context of existing AI and existing machine learning.
Very good.
And the interesting analogy that I've come up with at the moment, still working it, so keen to hear feedback on this, is that sort of AI is a circus show, and machine learning is very much like the circus games that are very like one-sided, very narrow.
Yep.
You do something, you get a reward at the end. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's predictive in nature, right?
Okay.
Whereas generative AI is like this, I don't know if you've ever been in one of these. It's like these labyrinth with mirrors.
Oh, yeah. The crazy hall of mirrors kind of thing.
Yeah. So my concept that I'm saying with generative AI, it's that it's not creating something net new. It's giving you the illusion that it's creating something net new.
Yep.
And what it's doing, it's allowing us to see our ideas and concepts from another angle.
Yeah.
So it looks fresh, it looks original to us. A lot of the ideas look original to you personally, but in the grand scheme of what is possible, that already exists somewhere in the ether. It already exists and a lot of ideas, a lot of creativity actually comes from somewhere else. With none of this, like when we think about the best ad campaigns, when you think about the best creative ideas, like they've all come from somewhere.
Exactly.
And essentially generative AI is this idea of sort of seeing it from a different perspective.
I like that kind of point of view, the hall of mirrors, and seeing it from different perspectives, because on the one hand, you've got people that talk about reasoning and it being limited just with the current models as they are. But if an expert comes in and say through RAG, let's say that they don't want to fine tune because it's more costly to do that. And obviously that comes down, but the easiest way being RAG. If their knowledge in terms of solving a maybe generic or even unique problem is loaded in there that the model didn't have. Well, now it's in as part of this RAG type model. And if you ask a question, yes, it will be able to solve based on that expertise. So it's important to have experts. And where I think that's really key, going back to the Hall of Mirrors thing that you mentioned, is that being able to have those different angles, it's important to have that expertise in there that, people think that, AI, so you get two camps. AI is really good at reasoning, and then others that go, no, it's actually not reasoning if it doesn't have that in there. It doesn't have novel kind of reasoning.
Yeah.
But humans don't really either. In some ways, some people do. They'll come up with something that no one has ever thought of before. But in many ways, we are just taking out what we have learned, something in the back of our head. We heard a trivia one of these days. And so I think it can be quite valuable, even though, we're not going to remember everything that we've ever been taught.
Correct.
The AI can. So this, the complaint that, it doesn't do reasoning, doesn't matter. Like, if it's in there and you've got these things that you've thought of as a solution and you haven't thought of these 5 other, that's still quite powerful in my mind. It's quite funny. I don't know what the word kind of is when people just be dismissive of, we know how the reasoning works. And yes, it's not full-blown reasoning, but it's still more powerful than, say, a human.
That's right. It's going back to like the note-taking analogy, like you're offloading parts of that process, you're dumping the things that are clouded in your brain, you're putting onto paper, you're synthesizing into something, right? So it's not like you're getting your notebook and pen to completely decide what you're going to eat for dinner, right?
Okay,
like,
yeah.
It's the same thing is happening here, but I think where people are going wrong is with these technologies. Some people are trying to see this technology, these large language models, as almost human-like, this personification of the technology. So then we're assuming it's going to behave human-like, or we're expecting it to perform as human-like. So, for example, it could be if we have a doctor in a medical scenario. I'll give you the most obvious example.
Yep.
We accept the fact that doctors will make mistakes. It's not that it's their fault. There's just error. There's a margin of error that occurs. But if an AI was to take over that process and an AI was to become a doctor, we don't allow any margin of error, even if that is better than a human.
Yeah, the error rate is like so
Correct.
much lower.
And where this issue comes back from is accountability. We as humans want someone we can blame, an actual human that we can point the finger to, going, that stuffed up, that person I can point the finger to. So if I use this day in, day out, I use this as part of my job, and that 1% of the time it goes wrong, I want to be able to point the finger at someone. I think there's a lot of these human biases that are coming into how we are interacting with these technologies, and it's shaping our relationship with these technologies today.
I think absolutely the biases are there. And you say relationships. I think number 2 in terms of this survey that was out of like the most common use cases, I think it was like companionship/therapy was the second most, and then it got into the work use cases and stuff, which was interesting, and people kind of like laugh at that. But I think it was character AI that was one of the most used, or apart from ChatGPT, whatever year it was that they were measuring, that was the second most visited kind of website. I haven't visited. I don't know many work people. Maybe it was like more younger folks and whatnot. But what do you think about like that personas type thing as being something that people are really vibing with? And I think that case where we anthropomorphize the machines was called the Evelyn effect, because there was like an early kind of robot-like thing that was called Evelyn. I don't know how long ago, but like an early version, maybe just an if-then-else. Not really a chatbot like we see now, but like a really old version. And Evelyn, I don't know if it's a Microsoft project, but yeah, what do you think about that personification type thing that people do?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that if we can humanize a machine, then we're going to accept it, right? Like essentially that's what it's coming back to. And when we think about the use cases, that character AI use case that you mentioned, I've got a personal sort of story to that. I heard somewhere, I can't remember where, a more younger generation in the US, apparently there's been cases of people talking to these AIs for like 10 hours in a day.
Really?
Like actually, right? So I was like, I got to take this for a run, right? I've got to test this essentially, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was about a year ago, I was in Melbourne on a trip. I had some free time. I was just wandering the streets. I fired up ChatGPT and put it in voice mode. So there's this mode where you can go into and you can have conversations. Most people are still dabbling in the text-based stuff, but it's the conversational stuff that changes it, because ultimately, because I'm no longer typing and I'm having a conversation over the phone, my experience felt very human-like quite straight away. And ChatGPT already has got a bit of context and history about who I am, what I do. And I asked it like, hey, I'm here. This is how much time I have. fill in the gaps for me. Like, give me
Wow.
some questions. I'm walking down a high street in Melbourne with my AirPods in, and eventually it led me to a bookstore, like a boutique bookstore, where I found a really good book on critical thinking, spoke to the bookshop owners,
Wow.
went to another bar for a non-alcoholic drink because I had a flight that evening,
Okay.
and then just jumped from one thing to the next. And it was this total experience that was created for me, right? And some people might say that's like perfect. It's therapy. It's given me what I wanted
Yeah.
at that point in time, right?
Sure.
And yes, there's dangers with that, like blindly following a machine. There's some
course.
serious dangers with that. But
Yep.
at the same time, it's calibrating your comfort level, calibrating what's right and wrong. And you could argue the same thing with the internet, right? So there's lots of probably
Yep.
dangerous content out there on the internet. You can easily find that dangerous content. You know, it's the same argument now. You know, there's always good and bad, no matter what you look at as well.
Completely agree with you. There was a, I mean, we're filming today on Monday, when it's the same day that over here in Australia we heard the news of Biden, stepping down away from the elections. And not that we're getting into the politics, but just listening to a Twitter space, and someone on there was complaining that her algorithm is stuffed up because she only sees certain things in terms of her social media. And part of it is like, well, who's been using your social media? Because you do shape. I agree that there's a bit of targeting, and Cambridge Analytica did prove that, but you also have a way that you can shape, your experience. And just going back to it, that you were asking, and it knew, I guess maybe in custom instructions, it knew a little bit about your background and whatnot. And I think it's important for people to realize that the more that you get more out of the experience when it knows more about you. Like, if you have a really bland query versus something that is rich, like, hey, I'm going to South Korea, give me an itinerary, versus I've got a wife and kids, here's their ages, these are the types of things we like to do, we don't like doing this, we like eating this, all of that kind of context, you just get such a richer kind of experience.
Yeah.
And do you still use like the headphone kind of mode and stuff, or where you talk to it?
I probably still type because it's just
Yeah.
habit forming, right? And I teach classes as well in universities and professional education, and the prompt engineering part, like, we go through a similar sort of travel itinerary use case.
Okay.
And
Oh, cool.
at the end of the course, I get people to redo it, and they're typing for like 3 minutes straight on their first prompt. Like,
Oh, wow.
they're giving it
Okay.
such rich context because they know the quality is going to come back.
Yep.
And it goes back to not treating the machine as a machine, but treating this as a bank of information that someone has. Well, if you had a stranger off the street come up to you and you told them to give me an itinerary for South Korea, they're
Exactly.
nothing about you. Like, what are they going to give you? So it's the same sort of
Yeah.
concept, right?
Very true.
So, and we've already gone through this sort of transformative experience before. So when search engines came about,
Oh, that's right.
Originally, people
Yeah.
would write these really long-winded questions into search engines
Yeah.
because they've noticed that actually that's how they communicated over the phone or
Yep.
other means of technology. Whereas now what's happening is that we don't ask questions anymore. We kind of paraphrase into these really sort of succinct keywords like best hotel X whatever place,
Yeah,
things
exactly.
like that. And the same thing's happening with these tools, where people are essentially giving it this like really short answers, expecting it. So we've kind of gone like full
Yeah.
round robin now, and the expectation is we treat it back as like a full conversational agent, which is very different from the search experience that's been hardwired into us.
Oh, I completely agree. We've come back full circle. It's fascinating that, and even though you might tell, maybe you have to do this like 10 times or 7 times, whatever that kind of rule of thumb is, it's not a search engine. It's not a search engine. And you keep saying that, and you're like, oh, but if it uses Perplexity as a search engine, or if you tell it to do a Google search first, if you're using ChatGPT, well, that's actually a RAG and it's searching for something first, but then you got to validate it. So there is a bit of nuance to that. And that's interesting because you are teaching as well as like working. I wanted to get to, and we're going off script here, folks. It's just a cool conversation and stuff. But I want to know more about what you're doing now, the teaching. And you mentioned before that you were in a day job. You are doing something on your own now.
That's
and
right.
doing some interesting things. I think it's really fascinating. But can we start off with like the teaching side first and get into what you're doing for work now? But when did you start teaching?
Yeah, so the interesting thing for me was when I started off my career, when I came from the UK to Australia, when I worked in consulting and agency side, you deal with a lot of clients, you deal with a lot of business owners,
Yeah.
you have to kind of make the complex simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really good mentor there, and one of the things he was kind of working through was like, what are the things you love, what are the things you hate? So the Japanese concept of ikagi,
Ikigai, yeah.
that's the one,
Yep.
ikigai. And essentially going through that process, I realized one of the things I really enjoyed was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a teacher. I wasn't someone who would teach, quote unquote, but I love this concept of giving people a new idea, a new way of thinking about a problem, a new way
Oh,
of seeing things. Because
okay.
it was very rewarding when the other side got it, right?
Like that
Essentially.
aha moment, you see
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Okay.
So one thing led to another, and through some means and processes and through the mentoring, I got given an opportunity more in the marketing space to do a little bit of teaching. Before you knew it, I was giving a lecture in RMIT with a translator sitting next to me. That was an experience because it was
Oh,
foreign
right.
delegates that were doing a course.
Where were they from?
From Vietnam, yeah. It was
Amazing.
a really, really interesting experience.
Okay.
And then from that point, I kind of like dabbled in it on and off. And a couple of years ago, I think it was during COVID, before COVID, can't remember, but technology just started to explode. And I'm not talking ChatGPT and AI, I'm just talking just data and the concept of, how powerful this stuff is. And we found during COVID how valuable this is in decision-making processes, right, as we can imagine.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a lot of the universities were basically looking for what they call online facilitators or lecturers that can help facilitate professional education programs, because traditional master's degrees do take a couple years to actually be formulated and go through processes and be vetted by the government and be all approved. So we do say that universities can be quite behind with the programs per se, but actually the research is definitely there because they're leading in the research space, but it has to go through into a more practical sense. So where it does come to life is in professional education. So
Okay.
I'm fortunate enough the last maybe 2.5 years I've been sort of what we call mentoring, but essentially delivering lecturing classes in with MIT's professional education courses in the US.
Oh, okay.
But I do it in this time zone, so I'll have students all over Asia Pacific region, like Singapore, Australia, Japan,
Nice.
India.
Wow.
Many from consulting companies and other companies that just want to grow in AI space. So it'd be like 14-week, totally intensive, hands-on, everything from like a very no-code experience to, you're a manager and you really want to understand this technology, to, hey, I'm an engineer and I want to be able to fine-tune a model. Let's do it together. So it's very
from the
on
non-tech to
spectrum.
the tech.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
it's been very, very rewarding. And very recently, I've been able to sort of get into that a little bit more with one of the leading universities here in New South Wales,
Amazing.
and sort of doing that part-time. Very casual,
Sure,
but
yeah.
it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding because I can test new concepts, ideas, thoughts, processes with practitioners and people in the field and sort of see that instant feedback loop, which is really great.
Wow. And I guess that probably leads into you leaving the work that you were doing to now pursue your passion. So that's really fascinating what you're doing on the university and the teaching side. But let's go back to the career side, because you told me before we started this that you'd stepped away from your day job.
Yep.
And you've gone into a focus more on the areas that you find passion around when it comes to this space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, 100%. So I think the key thing for me, or the sort of the turning point, was really generative AI really took off with the advent of ChatGPT and some of these more newer tools that we're seeing. It's been probably 2.5 years it's come about. But I was using this technology, generative models, pre-ChatGPT. I was very comfortable with them.
Okay.
And before ChatGPT sort of exploded, I was like an early user of these technologies.
Fantastic.
And had some pretty mad ideas of things I wanted to do. So
Okay.
synthetic user research is one of them. So like,
Yep.
how do we create personas and bend it and create new data from, a lot of the concepts we spoke about earlier, but more in a structured sort of setting.
Very good.
And this was like 2 years ago, right? And then sort of this agentic architectures came about, which is this idea that I could daisy chain these things to create reason, logic, decision making. And that's when there was a moment when I started feeding in all my notes that I fed in.
Okay.
And I was asking questions about
Yeah.
myself, and I literally had this moment of like, wow, this is transformative. Like, this is
Okay.
scary but cool,
That'll be the
And-
catchphrase for this
Yeah,
podcast.
scary
Scary
but-
but cool.
And I stood there that evening and just stared myself in the mirror. It was like, it's not a bad thing, but realizing that the adoption that's happening around me and this technology is just not at the speed that I want it to be, right? So I think one thing led to another. That's why I started writing about it. That's why I started talking about it. I started seeking out others like me, I suppose, in a better word for that. And that led me to, finding the AI Accelerator Build Club that we sort of mentioned at the start.
Yep.
A small group, which not so small now, but
Exactly.
a few hundred builders essentially building with generative AI technologies and advanced AI technologies. I got the opportunity to be like an advisor, an early participant in that program, and then from there start branching out, sort of, connecting with other startups. But really, the thing that's driving me at the moment is the book that I mentioned at the start. That process is almost meta research in a way, so research of research. So I'm spending a lot of my time speaking to a lot of AI startup founders, academics,
Fantastic.
people all over the world,
Yeah.
and just trying to piece together what does good look like from this technology. Like, what does an ideal state look like? What does use cases look like beyond what people are seeing today? And bring that to life, right, in a book, but then potentially in a product or potentially in some other avenues as well.
I love it. I mean, it would be remiss to not actually turn what is a traditional, and a book also means audible, and maybe
Correct.
you get the AI to read it out, but it also means in a world that we're at now, not just, hey, here's the book loaded into a tool and you can talk to it and stuff, and I let you, but it's also turning it into a product. Like, what does it? So Claude recently came out with a thing where they've got artifacts, and the difference there between ChatGPT function calling and where you can see the code come out, you had to take code out of ChatGPT and actually put it and apply it yourself, and then it makes an error. You tell ChatGPT, you go back and forth, you iterate. But with and you still do that with Claude because it will make mistakes. It'll sometimes tend to use libraries that it can't actually display. But the point is, it actually shows you a visual kind of preview in something called artifacts, and something that people have been testing, and I've been trying, and I'm like, wow, this is actually really cool. I've got to do this for more research papers, is taking a research paper or a pitch deck or something that you've written yourself and telling the AI Claude, using artifacts, make interactive charts out of this. So if it's a pitch deck and it's like, here's some sliders to talk about the different growth levels or something, or taking the Bitcoin white paper and turning it into something interactive. Your book, I think that there could be like some really interesting, fascinating stuff. Let's not, give away too much, about what you could do there with products. But just going to that, the knowledge kind of concept and, this thing that you're creating, you mentioned talking with people around the world.
That's right.
I find that fascinating. Are you seeing similarities, and are you also seeing differences with what people are saying?
Look, it's interesting when we think about knowledge, right? I'll touch on Claude for a second, and then
please.
I'll add a bit of context to that, and then sort of go into the whole idea of what we're seeing more globally. So the Claude example is taking people by storm, not because of its intelligence factor, although it feels intelligence, it's its utility purpose, right? It's like they started to find out what the experience needs to be, right? So it's not to say that some of these other models are not the same, if not better, otherwise. That's a different conversation. I don't want to open that can of worms now. I could talk for ages. But really, it's this idea that it gives me it solves the thing that I'm looking to solve in a way that I didn't think was possible. It kind of brings my concept to life, right? It visualizes it, or it writes the code and builds the app, lets me tinker with it. So for a layperson, it really makes it a lot more accessible, which I think is somewhat beautiful. But that's detached from the model. It's like this layer or this experience that they've built on top. Now, when we think about how does this look from a more international setting, I think we know that US is one market, Europe is one market. I'd say the Middle East is another market, and China being another leading market. Now, in terms of research output that is actually happening, is China is actually leading quite heavily, surprisingly, both from a monetary perspective, both from a volume perspective. And likewise, we have similar volume of research happening in the US, but funded by private capital, venture capital, that's sort of pushing that boundary. It's essentially a new sort of arms race that's happening with technology. Who can get there faster? Who can build the best model, the best experience? But more and more, we're now seeing the separation in this technology. So previously, we had the research which led to the infrastructure, the models. People aren't building models. Like, you're not going ahead and going, hey, I'm going to build my own language model. You can, but like that's now abstracted into a platform. Like, someone's built a tool, a shovel that you can buy that helps you build that together. So what's really happening in other markets like US, Europe, Middle East, and some parts of Asia that I mentioned is that they're able to take these models and build experiences on top of them that weren't possible before. And that takes a different way of thinking about it, because you're building products from the ground up using this technology because of its ability to communicate human-like, or to be able to help reason and help understand you, creates this new level of interfacing, like the artifacts in Claude.
Yeah.
And that needs a different way of thinking about how do you build products and services and technology.
I really like that. It's a saying that I'd heard, and I mean, you could replace this company with any, but it's if, for example, if Salesforce started today, given the tools that are available, it would likely not look like what Salesforce is now. But a lot of these companies, because they are legacy and they don't, whether it's not that they want to cannibalize, but it's such a massive beast for them to change and build something from scratch. So there is an advantage here for the startups in the community that you've got this opportunity to, create something new. But with that comes the fact that on the flip side, no one knows who the heck you are, and trying to educate. If you're doing something so new that you have to educate, I think it would have been hard. What do you think about that thing that, Sam Altman is quoted as saying something along the effects of they've released, ChatGPT because if they had waited years and just released something that, as we saw how fast it has improved, it would have been scarier. That concept that they release and just continuously release things, whether that is true or not. Like, I do see some kind of truth potentially to that. But what do you think? Do you think that they should, it would have been scarier if they had gone out years later with something big rather than just like iterate?
I won't talk about like is it good or bad what they've done, but from the sense of how would humans perceive it. If ChatGPT didn't happen and we saw the technology we're seeing now, where you basically have the knowledge of a doctor, a lawyer, whatever.
Yeah.
Not even on an online model, in an offline model that can fit on your phone to a degree.
Quantized, yeah.
Like that ability is mind-boggling, right? The ability to create images that are indistinguishable, to be able to create voices that are indistinguishable, to be able to create these experiences now that are indistinguishable. You would argue that if you ask the person the definition of what we call now AGI, this machine with its own being, and, Terminator-like, is that there? They would say yes, right?
Probably.
But now that's becoming more normalized for us, right? This idea that a machine can reason and can think in some ways.
Normalizing it, it's a good way to put it, right? Because I think when something becomes normalized, cars, when they came out, people, and that, they didn't work on certain roads because they weren't paved, and that it's like a figurative but like a literal kind of explanation or analogy that when the roads were paved, you had new products, you had trucks, you had motorbikes, and you had all these new types of cars, and they became better. And we're literally looking at how do we actually pave the roads when it comes to using generative AI types of technology. And I know that there is a bigger, wider AI space. There's all the machine learning side of things. There's a whole heap of other things in the world of, like, just say data science and data analytics, and AI is this big umbrella catch-all kind of thing. But just given that we're now more predisposed to seeing AI, and, well, when you say AI to people, they think ChatGPT, they don't think that other kind of stuff, but just fine. At least people are talking about it now. At least they're thinking about it. I hear it in cafes, like people talking about, oh yeah, so-and-so is now a prompt engineer. It's like, great. But maybe they took your course and stuff, but if they were doing marketing. But what do you think about, the mainstreaming effect? Is that a good thing? And what are the things maybe we should probably watch out for as this becomes a bit more mainstream?
I'll give you a bit of context as to like history on this one, right?
Okay.
This idea or fear of technology is not a new concept. It's been around for like the last 100+ years, right? And a lot of it comes back from the early days. We had steam engines came about. We had industrialization. We had the first industrial revolution. We had the second industrial revolution with electricity, right? Which came, 60, 70 years later. And then we had a third industrial revolution. And then the last few industrial revolutions were the sort of technology coming about, computers, replacing typewriters, replacing calculators, and all that sort of world of stuff. And then the one we're in now, which is a sort of new AI industrial revolution, this concept that, potentially can yield productivity. There's a lot of research showing both ways, but essentially we're in this new sort of realm of technology advancement that's happening. Now, the interesting thing that's happening is that not only we had a lot of people against each one of these, because it created a lot of change, and people don't like change, and people fear change, which is fair enough. But what's happening is that not only is each revolution getting shorter and shorter, but the distance between them are getting shorter and shorter. So previously you would have had one revolution, industrial revolution per lifetime.
Yeah.
We're now seeing two.
Yeah.
Right? So that volume of change is like hockey stick, right? In terms of societal impact, you know, how we interface with technology, what does this mean for advancements, what does this mean for medicine, everything, right, in society. And then you look at yourself in some respects and you go, holy cow, I'm scared shitless because, you know, this is scary. And rightfully so, because the speed in which this is happening is making us uncomfortable because we don't know what to grip onto. We don't know what's good, what's bad. And the analogy I use here is that at this conference I was at last week, I asked the crowd, how many of you are scared of heights? And half the crowd put their hand up, right?
Yep.
And 50% of us will be scared, maybe 60, I don't know what the actual statistic is, but the way I think about this technology and at this speed, it's almost like the people look at the fear, the what could go wrong, not so much the what could go up, right? And it's this sort of loss aversion sort of bias that we have, where we value something more when we lose it versus, you know, this fear of losing something is more valuable to people than the flip side. So, and Australia is one of the leading countries where we have a lot of AI skepticism.
Yes,
and I think a lot of this is, you know, we've got this beautiful view, we've got life is great, economy
what do we need AI for?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, now we're like we're scared of technology, we're scared of spiders, snakes, and you can add AI to that mix. And a lot of that is because the bottom is really low and people fear that the risks that come with it. But I think people are missing the opportunity that, you know, previously with AI, there was a certain opportunity space, but now that opportunity space is also even higher. It's exponentially higher, but also the risks are also exponentially higher. So a lot of organizations in Australia, and many of which I've spoken to, senior leaders in listed companies in Australia, take a very binary approach to this. So they take it very much like, AI is scary, it's dangerous, let's ban it. And this was about a year ago. This is before a lot of frameworks and policies and change started happening. Was like, we're going to ban it, we're going to shut it down, we're going to stop it, it's dangerous, it's going to kill our business or something thereof, right?
Sure.
And there's been cases where that's happened. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, it's very plausible, right? And on the other side, you have the other flip side, which is like, I'm going to start replacing humans in my workforce with AI, right?
Yeah.
But they're too extreme. Like, they're two very extreme views. And my personal opinion is somewhere in the middle. Like, if you're a public sector organization, should you be taking huge risks and, you know, with society as a whole and some of the services that you provide? Probably not. But in the same side, should someone like a startup that's leading in innovation not consider risks and not consider the fear and the dangerous side of what they're doing? So I think it comes back to balance. It comes back to each individual use case, each individual in an organization, to sort of evaluate that. And I think this whole binary, I don't know how to kind of put it into context.
It's like a binary star system.
Instead of a yes, no, there should be somewhere in between that. And I think that's what a lot of this sort of polarizing of ideas is sort of creating this. And it's the fear of the unknown. People are seeing this hockey stick. They only see the option as adopt, not adopt.
Adopt or die.
Exactly. And that's what's causing a lot of this sort of confusion in the market.